Welcome to Securing America with me, Frank Gaffney, the program that's a kind of owner's manual for protecting the country we love against all enemies, foreign and domestic, to God's glory and that of his kingdom. We are, of course, facing one most urgent threat. It is a challenge of unprecedented proportions. We talk about it daily here at Securing America, and frankly can't talk enough about the various dimensions and implications of the threat the Chinese Communist Party represents to our country. I'm very pleased to say later this week, our Center for Security Policy is going to be releasing a major new book on the subject. It's entitled The CCP is at War with America. That would be, of course, the Chinese Communist Party. And we have a foreword to that book by our first guest, I'm very pleased to say. His name is Gordon Chang. He is an author in his own right of numerous very important books, including The Coming Collapse of China. He is an essayist of great renown, notably at the Gatestone Institute and Newsweek. And he is not least a commentator on a whole host of issues involving China that I think, like the old E.F. Hutton line, when Gordon Chang talks, people listen. We certainly do. Gordon, welcome back to Securing America. Good to have you with us, sir.
Thank you so much, Frank.
Let's start with a thesis that you advanced in Newsweek recently, Gordon, that China is hoarding and otherwise restricting others' access to fertilizer and food as weapons in their efforts to exercise world dominance.
Both China and India are using their export bans on fertilizer to actually gain geopolitical advantage because they're giving exceptions to favored customers. In the case of India, it's Sri Lanka, and there they're using it against China. And in the case of China, they are using small sales to the Philippines as a way of prying Manila away from Washington. And of course, the United States and the Philippines have a mutual defense treaty, but that doesn't stop the Chinese. What's
Mm.
happening, Frank, is in the wake of the Ukraine war, we're seeing real disruptions to food global supply chains. And that, of course, includes fertilizer. And this is going to be a world of shortage where we could have conflicts over food and the components that go into making food. So, this is going to be, I think, the big issue of next year.
I couldn't agree more, but let me ask you, sort of on a calibration point, Gordon, what you've described is, it seems, part of a larger pattern. I think it's equally true that they've been hoarding energy. They've certainly been working to uh, exercise control of supply chains of everything from silicon chips to rare earth minerals to, as you say, fertilizer and food, uranium. At what point, Gordon, should we be perceiving what they're doing here as really putting China on a war footing, not only in terms of having abundance in these various commodities in the event that there's an interruption of the trade in them, but also as a means of denying them to adversaries, notably the United States, that is critically dependent upon supplies of many of these things from China.
We are critically reliant upon rare earth minerals. And this is, we've been for quite some time. For instance, and we know that China is trying to use that as a weapon as well. They did that in 2010
Mhm.
against Japan when they had their dispute over the detention of a Chinese captain in the East China Sea. And they've been using that against South Korea as well. So we're on notice, and we've done very little about this. We have rare earths in North America, both in the United States and Canada. We don't process them here. We've decided not to do that for environmental reasons. And really, what that means is that we've made ourselves consciously, we've made conscious decisions to become critically reliant on a country that I think is preparing for war against the United States. You know, it's not just food and fertilizer and
Yeah.
rare earths. We have seen the Chinese regime tell its officials to to get rid of their foreign assets as a means of protecting them from
Mhm.
future sanctions. And clearly, that's an attempt on the part of the regime to sanction proof itself because they know they're going to do something that we're going to impose sanctions on. And so, therefore, that's one of the clearest signs that they are preparing for war.
Yeah. If we're not already in it, I guess that's the bigger question. But certainly, they are taking steps to enable the kinetic kind of war, as opposed to the various other means, the unrestricted warfare they've engaged in for quite some time, to be pursued without uh, regard for possible sanctions against them. Gordon, let me just ask you, we talk about this a lot, but it seems to me particularly appropriate in this context. Is this an environment in which American investors should be encouraged to place more and more of their savings, their retirement funds, what have you, in Chinese Communist Party owned or controlled companies, which is to say, all of them?
This is an environment where American investors should be prohibited from investing in Chinese equities of all types. And this is not just state owned companies, this is not just military linked companies, but every Chinese company, in a sense, is linked to the Chinese military because they've got the doctrine of civil military fusion, which means that the military has access to everything that private companies have. And clearly, the Chinese Communist Party runs a top down system where it's all directed towards a single goal. So, this should be a straight out ban on all Chinese equities.
I couldn't agree more. And yet, even as we speak, this company, BlackRock, um, led by Larry Fink, has been opening still more avenues for Chinese access to our capital. Specifically, as you know, Gordon, the retirement savings of federal employees, past and present, military as well as civilian. And he is pursuing relentlessly the idea that more and more of their funds ought to be applied, and indeed those of U.S. investors more generally. A trebling of the uh, amount is something that he and others at BlackRock have been promoting. And I wanted to ask you, Gordon, another aspect of this that's insidious, it seems to me, is BlackRock has been putting its senior personnel into a lot of places in the United States government. Wally Adeyemo, the number two at the Treasury Department, for example. Brian Dees, the National Economic Council director. Tom Donilon, the new chairman of the State Department's Foreign Policy Advisory Board. These are all people who are going to be promoting and are promoting, I think it's fair to say, that BlackRock agenda. Just very quickly, 30 seconds. Advisable, inadvisable, dangerous.
Well, certainly inadvisable. BlackRock is the world's largest asset manager with $10 trillion of wealth under management. Ultimately, though, this is a failure of the political system. BlackRock is doing what's legal,
Mm-hmm.
as are other investment managers. It's really up to the Biden administration to say that this is illegal. And the Biden administration can do it with an executive order.
It could, but unfortunately, it seems to be moving the other direction rather than in that one, Gordon. But let's come back to this and other topics with Gordon Chang after this very short commercial message. We'll be right back, particularly talking about Taiwan right after this.